A quiet Saturday morning at a small Colorado cafe shattered in an instant. A hulking man deliberately crashed into a corner table, sending hot coffee splashing across the clothes of the man sitting there. Mocking laughter erupted from several customers nearby. The victim didn't flinch, didn't shout. He simply rose to his feet, calm and deliberate, and looked directly at the troublemaker. In that moment, the entire cafe fell silent, as if everyone in the room sensed something was terribly wrong. Who was this quiet man in the corner? His name was Jack Walker, 45 years old, a former U.S. soldier turned freelance carpenter, a single father. That Saturday morning, like every Saturday for the past 3 years, Jack sat at his usual corner table inside The Grind, a cozy little cafe in Fort Collins, Colorado. It was 9:30, and the place hummed with the gentle rhythm of a weekend morning. Espresso machines hissing, spoons clinking against ceramic, and the low murmur of conversations drifting through warm air that smelled of fresh roasted beans. Jack's appearance was unremarkable. A faded gray Henley shirt, worn jeans with frayed knees, and a scratched military-issue G-Shock watch strapped to his left wrist. On his right forearm, a faint scar ran from his wrist to just below the elbow. He never explained it to anyone. No one ever asked. He sat with his back against the wall, positioned so he could see both the front entrance and the rear exit without turning his head. An old paperback lay open on the table in front of him, but his eyes rarely touched the pages. It was a habit, a prop to disguise the way he constantly scanned the room, tracking every person who walked through the door. A cup of black coffee sat beside the book, steam curling lazily upward. Jack glanced at his watch. 2 hours until he needed to pick up Emily. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Flipping it open, he looked at the small photograph tucked behind a plastic sleeve. Emily, age 9, grinning at the camera with a gap where her front tooth used to be. The picture was 3 years old now, but he couldn't bring himself to replace it. His mind drifted, as it often did, to the night everything changed. He had been in Afghanistan when the call came through. 3 a.m, desert cold seeping through his tactical gear, a satellite phone pressed to his ear. Sarah's sister had been the one to deliver the news. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Sarah had hidden it from him for months, not wanting to distract him from his mission. She died 11 days later. Jack never got to say goodbye. Emily was 8 years old at the time. She had stood at the funeral holding her grandmother's hand, too young to fully understand, old enough to know her mother was never coming back. Jack left the army 6 months later, 18 years of service, including tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and places he still couldn't talk about. He walked away from all of it. For Emily. She was the only reason he woke up every morning, the only reason he bothered trying to live a normal life. His philosophy was simple. Stay out of trouble, avoid conflict, keep his head down. Emily needed a father who came home every night, not one sitting in a prison cell because he couldn't control his temper. He took a sip of his coffee and returned the wallet to his pocket. The front door swung open and 3 men walked in. Jack's eyes tracked them automatically, the way they always did with newcomers. The one in front was big, 6'1", maybe 6'2", with the thick neck and broad shoulders of someone who had once been an athlete. He moved with the swagger of a man who expected the room to notice him. Ryan Cole, 32 years old. Jack had seen him around town before, at the hardware store, at the gas station, always loud, always looking for attention. Word around Fort Collins was that Ryan had been a college football star before a knee injury ended his career. Now he worked part-time at an auto parts store and spent his weekends drinking and picking fights. Behind Ryan came 2 others. The first was thin and wiry, with a nervous laugh that seemed to erupt at everything Ryan said. Travis. The second was bigger, heavy-set, but his eyes had a hesitant quality, like he wasn't entirely comfortable with whatever his friends were doing. Derek. The 3 of them settled at a table near the entrance, their voices carrying across the cafe. Behind the counter, a man in his late 50s watched the newcomers with a practiced eye. Marcus Holloway had owned the grind for nearly 20 years. Before that, he had served in the Marine Corps, deployed to Kuwait during the Gulf War in '91. He had opened this cafe as a sanctuary, a quiet place where he could leave the chaos of his past behind. Marcus had noticed Jack Walker the very first time he walked into the shop. It wasn't anything obvious, just the way Jack carried himself, the way he chose his seat, the way his eyes moved. Marcus recognized it immediately. He had seen that look in the mirror for years after coming home. He never asked Jack about his service. Some things didn't need to be spoken. At a table near the window, a young woman sat with her 7-year-old son. Linda Marsh was 35, a single mother working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Her boy, Tommy, was drawing on a napkin with a crayon, completely absorbed in his artwork. Linda glanced over at the 3 loud men near the door and instinctively moved her chair closer to her son. Ryan Cole stood up from his table, announcing loudly that he needed more sugar. He grabbed his coffee cup and began walking toward the condiment station, but instead of taking the direct path, he veered toward the corner of the room, toward Jack's table. Jack saw it coming. The angle was wrong, the trajectory deliberate. He could have moved, could have pulled his coffee closer. But he didn't. He simply sat there, watching. Ryan's hip collided with the edge of Jack's table with enough force to send the coffee cup tumbling. Hot liquid splashed across the table, soaking the paperback, spreading onto Jack's jeans. Ryan threw his hands up, a grin spreading across his face. "Oh man, I'm so sorry, buddy. Didn't even see you sitting there." He turned toward Travis and Derek, raising his voice so the whole cafe could hear. "You guys see that? This guy's practically invisible." Travis burst into laughter. Derek managed a weak chuckle. A few other customers snickered, and someone in the back raised their phone, recording. Jack said nothing. He rose from his seat slowly, his movements unhurried. He reached for a stack of napkins from the dispenser on the table and began dabbing at the coffee stain on his jeans. His face was completely blank, as if Ryan Cole didn't exist, as if this moment wasn't happening at all. Behind the counter, Marcus set down the portafilter he had been loading. His eyes narrowed. Linda pulled Tommy closer, wrapping an arm around his small shoulders. Ryan's grin faltered. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He had expected anger, embarrassment, maybe a stammered demand for an apology. Instead, he got nothing. He stepped closer to Jack, close enough that Jack could smell the cheap cologne and stale beer on his clothes. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You deaf or something?" Jack continued wiping his jeans. Ryan's jaw tightened. He reached out and shoved Jack's shoulder, not hard enough to knock him back, but hard enough to make a point. "What's the matter? You mute? Or just scared?" Somewhere in the back of Jack's mind, he heard Sarah's voice, the last thing she had said to him before he deployed for that final tour. "I believe in you. You're going to be an amazing father." He thought about Emily waiting for him at her grandmother's house. He thought about the ice cream shop on Main Street where he had promised to take her after lunch. He thought about how much she needed him, not in a prison cell, not on the news, just there, present, whole. This guy isn't worth it, he told himself. Walk away. But Ryan shoved him again. Jack's head lifted slowly. For the first time since the encounter began, he looked directly into Ryan's eyes. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. When Jack spoke, his voice was low and even. No anger, no fear. Just a simple statement of fact. "You spilled my coffee. You should apologize and leave." Ryan blinked, thrown off by the calmness in Jack's tone. Then he laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the walls. He turned to his friends, gesturing at Jack with disbelief. "You hear this guy? He's telling me what to do." He turned back to Jack, stepping even closer, their faces now inches apart. "You just tell me to apologize? Who do you think you are, old man?" Jack didn't move. He didn't blink. Behind the counter, Marcus's hand drifted beneath the register, where he kept a baseball bat for emergencies. He had never needed to use it. He hoped today wouldn't be the first time. At her table, Linda whispered to Tommy, "Don't look, sweetie. Just keep drawing." But Tommy was already staring, his crayon frozen in his hand. The phones were still recording. The cafe was silent except for the soft hiss of the espresso machine. Ryan's smile had turned into something uglier now, his ego wounded by Jack's refusal to cower. "You got a death wish, buddy? Because I'll give you what you're asking for." Jack's gaze remained fixed on Ryan's face. His voice didn't change. "I've asked you once. I won't ask again." The line had been drawn. There was no going back now, not for either of them. Ryan Cole had never met a man he couldn't intimidate. His size, his voice, his reputation, they had always been enough. In bars, on the street, in parking lots after closing time, people backed down. They apologized. They looked away. But this man in the faded gray Henley wasn't backing down. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't even blinking. It infuriated Ryan. He began to circle Jack slowly, playing to the audience that had gathered. Phones were still raised, recording every second. This was his stage now, and he intended to perform. "Look at you," Ryan said, gesturing at Jack's clothes with exaggerated disgust. "That shirt looks like you pulled it out of a dumpster." "What happened, buddy? Life hit you a little too hard?" Jack remained silent, his eyes tracking Ryan's movement without turning his head. Ryan's grin widened. He was getting warmed up now, feeding off the attention, the nervous energy in the room. "Let me guess," he continued, tapping his chin as if deep in thought. "Wife left you, right? Took the house, took the car, took whatever dignity you had left. I get it, man. Looking at you, I wouldn't stick around either." Something shifted in Jack's expression. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a slight tension in his jaw, but it was there. His hands, which had been hanging loosely at his sides, slowly curled into fists. The knuckles went white. For a brief moment, Jack wasn't in the cafe anymore. He was standing in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and decay. Sarah lay in the bed, her once vibrant face hollowed by disease, her skin almost translucent. She had smiled at him, that same smile from their wedding day, from the morning Emily was born, and told him everything would be okay. It was the last time he saw her alive. Jack inhaled deeply through his nose. He unclenched his fists, one finger at a time. Control. He had to maintain control. Ryan noticed the reaction and pounced on it like a predator sensing weakness. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? What's the matter? She find someone better? Someone who actually has a backbone?" From across the cafe, Tommy's small voice cut through the tension. "Mommy, why is that man being so mean?" Linda pulled her son closer, her face pale. "Don't look, honey. Just keep your head down." But Tommy kept staring, his young eyes wide with confusion and fear. Several more phones had appeared around the room. Someone in the corner whispered to a companion, "Why doesn't he just do something?" Behind the counter, Marcus caught the eye of his young employee, a college student named Haley, who worked weekend shifts. He gave her a small nod toward the back room. She understood immediately and slipped away to make a call. Marcus's hand remained beneath the counter, fingers wrapped around the handle of the baseball bat he kept there. His eyes never left the two men in the corner. Ryan stepped closer to Jack, so close now that their chests were almost touching. He placed both hands on Jack's chest and shoved hard. Jack stumbled back a step but didn't fall. His arms remained at his sides. He didn't raise them to defend himself. He didn't push back. Ryan spread his arms wide, addressing the room like a showman. "You see this? This guy's got nothing. Come on, old man, hit me. Hit me if you're a real man." Jack's feet shifted almost imperceptibly. His left foot slid back half a step. His knees bent slightly, lowering his center of gravity. His hands stayed down, but they were no longer limp. There was a readiness in them now, a coiled tension. From behind the counter, Marcus saw the change. It was subtle enough that most people would miss it entirely, but Marcus had spent enough years around soldiers to recognize a combat stance when he saw one. His stomach dropped. Lord have mercy, he thought. That kid has no idea what he's playing with. Inside Jack's mind, two voices were at war. The first voice was cold, clinical, precise. It was the voice that had kept him alive through 18 years of combat, through firefights in Fallujah, through midnight raids in the mountains of Afghanistan, through situations that would break most men. Distance, 2 feet. Target is standing with feet too wide, weight on his heels, high center of gravity, exposed throat, exposed knee, exposed groin. Time to neutralize. Under 3 seconds. The second voice was softer, desperate, pleading. It was the voice of the father who had promised himself, promised Emily, that he would never become what he used to be. Don't do this. She needs you. She needs her father to come home tonight. Walk away. Just walk away. Ryan was still talking, still performing, but Jack barely heard him anymore. The words were just noise, static interference over the signal his body was receiving. Every muscle was awake now, every nerve ending fired with precision. The room seemed to slow down, every detail crystal clear. The way Ryan's weight shifted when he breathed, the slight tremor in his right hand that suggested previous injury, the distance to the door, the positions of every person in the cafe. But Jack didn't move. He stood there, a perfect statue of restraint, holding back 18 years of lethal training with nothing but willpower. Ryan's face was turning red now. The lack of response was driving him crazy. He had expected fear, submission, maybe even tears. Instead, he got this infuriating stillness, this quiet refusal to engage. "You think you're tough?" Ryan's voice rose to a shout. "You think you're better than me? Is that it?" Travis stepped forward, reaching for Ryan's arm. "Hey man, maybe we should just go. This isn't worth it." Derek nodded nervously. "Yeah, come on. Let's get out of here." Ryan shook them off violently. "Get off me. This piece of garbage disrespected me. Nobody disrespects me." He spun around, looking for something to release his rage on. His foot connected with a wooden chair, sending it flying across the cafe. The chair skidded across the floor and crashed into the table where Linda and Tommy sat. Linda screamed, throwing herself over her son. Tommy burst into tears, his small body shaking with terror. The crayon he had been holding rolled across the floor and came to rest at Jack's feet. Something in Jack's chest cracked open. He looked at the crying child, at the mother desperately trying to shield her son from harm. He thought of Emily at that age, small and frightened, standing at her mother's funeral. He thought of all the times he had promised himself he would protect the innocent, that his training would be used for good, not for violence. This wasn't about him anymore. If he walked away now, Ryan would keep going. He was out of control, beyond reason. Someone else would get hurt. The mother, the child, one of the other customers. Jack could see it in Ryan's eyes, the way a man looks when he's stopped thinking and started acting on pure animal instinct. Jack made his decision. He would stay. Ryan turned back to Jack, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage. Spittle flew from his lips as he screamed. "You want some of this? You want me to put you in the ground, old man?" Jack's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You need to calm down. There are children here." The words hit Ryan like a slap. For a moment, his expression flickered. Confusion, maybe even a hint of shame. But then the rage came roaring back, stronger than before. "Don't you tell me what to do!" His right arm cocked back, his shoulder rotated, his hips turned, loading power into the punch. Jack saw it all in slow motion. The telegraphed wind-up, the slight drop of the elbow, the way Ryan's weight shifted to his back foot before exploding forward. It was a haymaker, the kind of punch a former athlete throws when he wants to end a fight with one blow. Time stretched like taffy. In that frozen moment, Jack thought of Emily. He saw her face, older now at 12, with Sarah's eyes and his stubborn chin. He heard her voice asking why he was late, why he had coffee stains on his jeans, why he looked so tired. What would she think of him if he hurt this man? What would she think if she saw the video that was surely being recorded right now? Would she understand that her father had no choice? Or would she look at him the way the world looked at him, as a weapon, a trained killer, something to be feared? He thought of Sarah, of the promise he had made to her memory, to be the father Emily deserved, to build a life worth living, to leave the violence behind. I tried, he told her silently. I tried so hard, but there was no more room for trying. Ryan's fist was coming, and behind it was every ounce of strength the man possessed. If it connected, it would break bones. It would draw blood. It would turn this cafe into a crime scene. Jack had spent his entire adult life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He had done terrible things in the name of that mission, things that still woke him up at 3 a.m, covered in sweat. He had walked away from all of it for Emily, had buried that part of himself so deep he thought it was gone forever. But it wasn't gone. It had just been waiting. The fist was 6 inches from his face. Jack Walker, carpenter, single father, the quiet man in the corner, made his choice. And the soldier came back. 4 seconds. That was all it took. In the first second, Jack tilted his head to the right. Ryan's fist sailed past his ear, close enough that he could feel the air displacement against his skin. Jack hadn't dodged by instinct. He had read the punch before it was thrown, tracking the rotation of Ryan's shoulder, the angle of his elbow, the trajectory that revealed itself like a sentence written in slow motion. In the second, Jack stepped diagonally forward, closing the distance instead of retreating. His left hand shot out and caught Ryan's right wrist, still extended from the missed punch, gripping it firmly. He pulled downward while twisting outward, using Ryan's own momentum against him. In the third second, Ryan's balance collapsed. His body pitched forward, completely off axis. Jack's right foot swept behind Ryan's ankle, while his right hand pressed down on the man's shoulder, guiding him toward the floor with mechanical precision. In the fourth second, Ryan was face down on the hardwood, his right arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made movement impossible without excruciating pain. Jack dropped one knee onto the center of Ryan's back, pinning him in place with controlled pressure. No punches, no broken bones, no blood, just absolute efficiency. The cafe was silent, not the comfortable silence of a lazy morning, but the stunned silence of people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. For 2 or 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. Travis stood frozen near the door, his mouth hanging open. Derek had gone pale, his eyes wide with something that looked like terror. Neither of them dared to take a single step. Behind the counter, Marcus slowly removed his hand from beneath the register, leaving the baseball bat untouched. He let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping. When he looked at Jack, there was something in his eyes. Respect, recognition, and a deep, quiet sadness. He spoke softly, just loud enough for Jack to hear across the room. I knew from the start. Jack didn't acknowledge the words. His focus remained entirely on the man beneath him. Ryan was struggling, trying to push himself up, but every movement sent sharp pain through his twisted arm. He cursed and thrashed, his face pressed against the floor. Jack's voice was low, calm, utterly devoid of anger. Stay down. Don't move. Ryan kept struggling. Jack applied slightly more pressure to the arm lock, just enough to send a clear message. I don't want to hurt you. Don't make me. Ryan finally went still, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his cheek pressed against the cold floor. The wail of sirens cut through the morning air, growing louder by the second. 2 police cruisers pulled up outside the cafe, their lights flashing red and blue through the windows. Jack released Ryan's arm carefully, making sure not to cause any additional injury. He stood up slowly, then raised both hands to shoulder level, palms facing outward. It was a posture that anyone who had worked with law enforcement would recognize immediately. The universal signal of compliance, of non-threat. The officers entered with hands on their weapons, assessing the scene quickly. One of them, a younger man in his 30s, moved toward Ryan, who was still lying on the floor groaning. The other officer, older with gray at his temples, approached Jack. Linda was the first to speak. She stepped forward, still holding Tommy close to her side. "Officer, that man on the floor started everything. He attacked this gentleman. It was self-defense." Her voice was shaking, but her words were clear and certain. Other voices joined in, confirming her account. Someone held up their phone, offering video evidence. The story was consistent from every witness. Ryan Cole had initiated the confrontation, had escalated it repeatedly, had thrown the first punch. Travis and Derek said nothing. They stood near the wall with their eyes on the floor, making no attempt to defend their friend. The younger officer pulled Ryan to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back. Ryan's face was a mask of confusion and humiliation. He kept looking at Jack, trying to understand what had just happened, how he had ended up on the ground in less time than it took to blink. The older officer studied Jack for a long moment. His nameplate read, Daniels. There was something knowing in his gaze, something that went beyond standard police observation. "You served?" Officer Daniels asked quietly. Jack lowered his hands. "Long time ago." Daniels's eyes dropped to Jack's right forearm, to the faint scar that ran from his wrist to just below the elbow. Then his gaze returned to Jack's face. "Fort Bragg?" Jack didn't answer, but his silence said everything. Daniels nodded slowly, a small gesture of understanding between men who had seen things most people never would. "Thank you for not crippling him." Jack said nothing. The officer took out a small notepad. "We'll need a statement, but the witnesses are pretty clear. You want to press charges?" Jack shook his head. "I don't want to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I just want to go home to my daughter." Daniel studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. If we need anything else, we'll be in touch." Ryan was led out of the cafe in handcuffs, still looking dazed. Travis and Derek followed the officers outside, eager to distance themselves from the scene. The red and blue lights faded as the cruisers pulled away. The cafe began to breathe again. The espresso machine hissed. Quiet conversations resumed, though the tone was different now. Hushed, reverent, still processing what had occurred. Marcus came out from behind the counter, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. He walked over to Jack and held it out. "On the house. Same deal next time you come in." Jack accepted the cup with a small nod of thanks. Marcus's voice dropped lower, meant only for Jack's ears. "I was at Café in '91. I know that look in a man's eyes. What you did just now, showing that kind of restraint, that's harder than anything else." Jack met the older man's gaze. For a moment, something passed between them, an understanding that required no words. "Thank you," Jack said quietly. "It wasn't easy." He turned and walked toward the door, the coffee warm in his hand. As he passed Linda's table, she reached out and touched his arm gently. "Thank you for protecting us." Tommy looked up at Jack with enormous eyes, his tears now dried, replaced by something like wonder. "Are you a superhero?" Jack stopped. He crouched down so that he was at eye level with the boy, and for the first time that morning, a genuine smile crossed his face. "No, buddy. I'm just a dad." He straightened up, gave Linda a small nod, and walked out of the cafe. The morning sun was warm on his face as he crossed the parking lot to his old pickup truck. He climbed into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the world. For a long moment, he just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel. He looked at his watch. 11:15. 15 minutes until he needed to pick up Emily from her grandmother's house. Jack closed his eyes and drew a deep breath, held it, then let it out slowly. His hands were trembling slightly, the delayed response of adrenaline working its way out of his system. It was a familiar feeling, one he had experienced countless times in another life. He had hoped never to feel it again. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. The photograph of Emily smiled up at him, gap-toothed and joyful, frozen at age 9. He ran his thumb gently across the plastic sleeve. "I kept my promise, sweetheart," he whispered. He tucked the wallet away and started the engine. The old truck rumbled to life, and Jack pulled out of the parking lot onto the main road. The streets of Fort Collins were quiet, bathed in late morning light. Other cars passed by, their drivers absorbed in their own lives, their own problems, their own Saturday routines. None of them glanced at the weathered pickup truck merging into traffic. None of them noticed the man behind the wheel. Just another vehicle, just another stranger, just a father on his way to pick up his daughter, right on time.